If you look in the brain in people that are in grief from loss of a really strong attachment, the state of brain and body that gets flipped on is a motivational state.
In case you're struggling with intimate relationships, you may have problems with your attachment styles that derive from your earliest experiences with your parents. If you know the effects of parenting styles as a child, you'll better understand the roots of possible issues with your relationship. This way you can address the problems on your own or with the help of a therapist.
Have you thought about the neuroscience of what's happening during heartbreak?
There's the so-called secure attached style. This typically emerges in childhood when there's a very predictable caregiver-caree relationship between child and most often mother, but it can be father too or other caregiver. Just so happens that the classic experiments were done on mothers because this was in the 1970s and there weren't as many reverse role, homes, etc. There were some, but not as many as there are now. So that's one style of attachment. The parent leaves, the child gets a little distraught, but then can distract itself doing other things or just simply do other things because they have a high degree of intrinsic knowledge, not the thought, but intrinsic calm. The autonomic nervous system doesn't feel any need to ramp up because the mom returns. Then there's the so-called insecure attachment styles, and there are a bunch of different ones, but those are the ones where it's really stressful when the parent leaves. It's not clear they're going to come back, and when they come back, it's not clear that they're going to reestablish the bond, the child will feel supported, etc. Here's what's fascinating. Those same neural circuits are repurposed for romantic attachment in adult life. The same circuits, which shouldn't surprise us. I mean, why would the brain throw away valuable circuitry? But this whole Freudian notion that, childhood attachment styles map onto adult attachment styles, that's real. That's physiological.
This phenomenon does not depend upon a one-to-one relationship with either of your parents. If you have a good relationship with one of your parents, let's say your dad, and you have an insecure attachment with your mother, your adulthood relationship can still go either way. If you're a male, you might love your girlfriend a lot because you crave that love that you didn't receive from your mother. Or you might hate your girlfriend because of the same experiences from your childhood.
Now, one important point, it's not one for one in the sense that, let's say you had a secure attachment to your father. Let's say it's a young girl, and as a baby and a young child, she had a secure attachment to her father and an insecure attachment to her mother. In adulthood, and let's say she's heterosexual, so in adulthood, she prefers men as romantic partners. This girl grows up, and you might say, well, she had a good relationship to her dad, so she's gonna have a good secure attachment style in her adult heterosexual relationships. Often it's not the case. They will transplant or superimpose the insecure attachment style to the mother onto male relationships, but have great relationships to female friends, for instance. So we have to be a little careful to not map one for one. That's important. So all of that is in us.
Grief has a sort of spiritual relationship with the nervous system and the brain. It depends on space and time and the level of closeness or attachment of the person. If your partner or relative is abroad, you will definitely miss them because you were attached to them psychologically. Whereas if you suddenly receive the news that they are no more with you, the missing perspective will instantly change into grieving.
And then you were talking about breakups, and we did an episode on grief. And the way that grief works in the brain and nervous system is that there are three sort of factors that are mapped in our consciousness and our subconscious. And these are space, time, and this notion of closeness, which is attachment. Space and time is very simple. It's where is the person that I love and when will I see them next, right? I mean, if you have a relative that lives overseas and you know they're alive, you're not going to grieve them. You might really miss them, but you're not going to grieve them the same way you would if suddenly you get the note, unfortunately, that they passed away. And then attachment is how close you are to them, like how critically you rely on them for internal control and support. And that doesn't mean they have to be an immediate caregiver. It could just be like a really good friend. You call them mates over in the UK, right? Like a really good friend that just your knowledge of him just makes you feel good. You feel better in the world. As a guy who mostly grew up with kind of a big pack of male friends, I mean, I feel strongest and happiest and most secure in life when I see something about one of my friends doing well in life. It just makes me feel good. If one of them dies, and unfortunately, I'm getting to the age where a number of them have died, then you feel like all of a sudden, like goodness, like there's a loss internally, right?
The occurrence of someone close to you dying is very confusing for your brain. Grief is a natural response to loss. Initially, you'll feel like you're not ready to process it. However, after some months or years, you'll move on and restore your life to a meaningful experience.
Okay, that's all sort of obvious, but what's interesting is that the grief process itself is about restructuring this map. Think of it like a tripod. It's got three pieces: space, time, and closeness. When someone dies, it's very confusing for the brain because where are they in space? Well, the body is put someplace. Maybe it's cremated, maybe it's not. We have notions of a spirit, and that depends on one's orientation, a soul or a spirit, okay? Or if you don't, then you don't. Then where do they go, right? And then time, when will you see them again? there's the never. You'll never see them again. And the closeness component remains. And so there's an untethering of this map. And so there's been brain imaging studies, beautiful work by Mary Frances O'Connor at University of Arizona, showing that if you look in the brain in people that are in grief from loss of a really strong attachment, the state of brain and body that gets flipped on is a motivational state. It's exactly the same circuitry in the brain that one sees active if someone very hungry is put just outside the wall of some delicious food, or if an animal that really wants to mate is put just beyond the wall of that animal, but they can smell them. I mean, these are highly motivated, desiring states. So grief is a motivated state to bridge the distance in time and space, and yet it's impossible. And so the process of grief is a gradual waning of that motivation and a gradual shift of the memory of the person into some concept, whether or not it's a soul, whether or not it's just the past, whether or not it's their energy. Again, it depends on what the forebrain of that particular person believes, shifts that concept of that person into a place where the brain is comfortable. There's no more autonomic arousal. There's no motivation. And we've all experienced this. If you've had a loss, and I've had a loss, for instance, where my graduate advisor died and I adored her. And every once in a while, her daughter will call me from her cell phone, and she kept the same number on that phone and the name and everything. So every once in a while, it'll ring Barbara Chapman, and I'll reach for the phone, and then there's this moment where I'm like, oh, goodness.
When you break up with a person, moving on can be a pretty rough experience. You just need to let them go and move on. But guess what? This is very tough in the era of social media, where you can stalk your ex moving on from you. It was easier in the past because people had no cell phones or the internet. All they had to do was divert their attention and stay out of sight.
So anyway, I'm going on and on just to color this with example, but when there's a breakup, it's exceedingly hard, especially if the person is young. If you look at suicides after breakups, those are far more common in younger people than they are in older people. Why? Because the relationship represents the whole future. They have no concept that they know there are other people, but it sort of feels like the whole world is shutting down. So in breakups, what's happened is the person is no longer available in time and space. This is why when someone breaks up, you literally have to let them go, right? Constant pursuit of them is out of context, is not healthy. They have a name for that. It's called a stalker. Don't do it. But it's almost as if the brain has to think that the person is gone in time and space. This has become much harder with social media, right? Because people can check up on people, they can hear from people. In the old days, like when I was growing up, you just took the phone off the hook or you diverted your attention. Now we are constantly renewing that the person is still there. And so love and the loss of love and the death grief are virtually identical. That motivational state. And this is why it's so hard to not reach out to somebody that you really miss and want back.
Have you ever gone through a breakup? Let us know in the comment section below. If you found this video interesting or helpful, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and press the notification bell so you won't miss any of our future uploads. Until then, take care.